Live. All right. Looks like things are good to go. Okay, so we're going to discuss techniques. This is a group of Todd Hurst, Dana Watts, Tyler Watts, and Ryan Schubart, and Joshua Marsh. We're going to be talking about action learning. We're going to start off with action learning, then a discussion about appreciative inquiry, then future search conferences, and premortem techniques. So Ryan's going to start us off, and we're then going to follow everything up at the end with a discussion about all the different techniques and how they apply to P12 education and higher education settings. All right, here we go.
All right, so I'm here to talk about action learning. Our group of Stephanie Anderson, Sarah Heinzelman, and myself worked on the action learning part. And so we want to talk about a little bit about the conditions first that are required for successful use of action learning. Action learning is actually considered one of the most successful areas or methods to use. It promotes system thinkers. It provides a change agent. It's very good for innovation, but it requires risk taking. Leaders that exhibit this type of method are typically servant and stewards. Basically, they're facilitating what's going on, but they need to empower their people to make decisions and to step up to make these decisions and solve these problems. Polychronic coordinator manage and integrate many things at the same time. So they're constantly multitasking and considering multiple perspectives instead of focusing on one thing and then moving to the next thing, much like a system thinker would do. A teacher, a mentor, a coach, and a learner. They have the learning and how to learn skill, the opportunity to learn, and the capacity to learn. So that really plays into being a successful implementation of action learning. They are visionary and vision builders, so they can kind of see where they need to go and communicate that to others. They envision a future world that is exciting and challenging enough to attract and retain the best and brightest of know-how workers. So they're very good at seeking that talent and bringing that talent out of their people. So a couple of what action learning would look like. So first, a group of people would get together and they would each member would think about the work-based issues he or she wishes to bring to the set. So what are some things that need some solving or some repair or some adjusting? The set members agree to set aside the necessary time for the meeting, and it should be held where they will be free from distraction so that they can focus on the task at hand. The facilitator might remind set members of the group of ground rules established during the formation of the set and may recap the key principles of the methodology. And then the set members check in, and those who had an opportunity to explore their issue in previous set report to others on actions taken since the last time that they met. One of the set members is then given airtime for about an hour. And this begins with a member taking about 5 to 10 minutes of uninterrupted minutes to outline the work-based issue that he or she is bringing to the other members. Then the other members ask questions of clarification. They move into reflective and analytical questions toward the end of the questioning. During this process, the facilitator may sometimes stop the set to raise awareness on matters of process. For example, if the set members are giving advice packaged as questions. At the end of that airtime, the set member presenting the issues provides feedback on how he or she experienced the process and what learning took place. The set members also offer observations and learnings on both process and content. The process of airtime is repeated for as many set members as possible in the time available so that everyone gets a chance to express their issues. The meeting may conclude with the completion of an action review sheet that aims to capture key learnings and action plans from the meeting. So it's a cyclical type of situation where you continue to go through until you get to the result that you are looking for. So a couple of intended outcomes of action learning. One thing is that it develops the attributes of a 21st century leader: creativity, flexibility, problem solving, or just a couple: communication, collaboration. It also enables individuals to identify personal development challenges. So each person may find something in their field or their area that is a challenge, and so this gives them the opportunity to express that concern and try to address that concern. And so it's almost a differentiated approach to solving problems. It develops a more disciplined method of working with powerful teams, since a type of infrastructure there, and people are learning while they are working. So you have this set system in place. Anytime there's a problem, there's already a system there that you can go to and fall back on. As I said before, it develops a system-type thinking. You're looking at the whole organization and how the whole organization works, and how one action here may affect another action somewhere else, and how it's going to basically affect the whole organization. It supports innovation. There are no cookie-cutter type answers to solve some of these problems, and so a lot of innovation tends to come out of the brainstorming that is brought about by these groups bringing themselves together and in this system. It develops a culture that can adapt to change and learn. Because there is a system already developed, anytime an organization is faced with a problem or a challenge, they feel comfortable enough to go to this set and take care of the problem. No matter how challenging it might be, there's calmness in knowing that there's already a structure there in place, and so it provides that structure for peer support. And it also encourages leadership and taking initiative. So you're empowering your people to step up, and even though they may not be the leader necessarily or in charge by their job title, they are empowered to offer solutions that may be some that save the company or help the organization move forward, and they're empowered to do that. And the leaders, that's where we get kind of that servanthood or that stewardship type of leadership, where you're really leading from the back and supporting your people and pushing them up to those situations where they can shine. So, critiquing the strategy in an educational setting, a couple of things that you want to consider. The success relies heavily on the facilitator's ability, and when you think about education, who is going to be that facilitator and what training are they going to have so that they can run this type of situation? Because if the facilitator is not good, then basically it's like having your head cut off. There's no organization or lead person to really move the organization forward if they're not doing that effectively. So there is a lot of investment in that one person, kind of putting your eggs all in one basket there on the effectiveness of that facilitator. Also, you have to have willing participants and support for the outcomes developed by the group. So in education, sometimes we are a little bit of a fragmented area where people go into their classrooms and they do their things and they work in their departments, and there's some autonomy there, and it's not always, we see this with PLCs, it's not always easy to accept what's good for the greater group when you're kind of freelancing in your own area and doing what works for you or what you think works for you. And so you have to have that willingness to accept a method that may be better for the greater good, and to be selfless in that and buy into that. It also doesn't appear always to be well organized and controlled, because each situation is different, and even though we have that system in place of how we're going to do it, it can be chaotic because the answers can come from different places, different areas, um, different people within the organization. Oftentimes in an organization, you look to the top for the answers, and that's not necessarily the way that this is designed. It can also be difficult to ensure that individualized development occurs, and so kind of what I was talking about before with, so if we decide that in a grade level that we're going to do something this way to solve this problem, how can we be sure that each person in that area is going to be able to adopt and develop further in their strategies that we've developed for the whole group? It also involves more human resources meetings to address a problem. So where are we going to get this time for teachers to sit together and discuss how to solve this problem when we also need them to be in the classrooms teaching? And that's a big thing with any educational organization, is time. I think if you were to poll most teachers and even most administrators, they would say that the one thing that they are really lacking to do their job is time. And so where are we going to carve out some time for this to happen? Almost a type of a triage situation where, I have 3 classes to teach today, I have an hour and a half to plan for tomorrow, and you want me to stay after school to talk about this, or how are we going to decide what these problems are? So those are some issues with how it may not work in the educational setting, or at least challenges that need to be considered and addressed. And so that is action learning from our point of view. Any questions or thoughts?
You had mentioned there's a lot of risk taking. So are there like limitations on what people can do? Are there like restrictions to keep people from going so far that they mess up something, or they create a problem that can't be solved because they're just doing so much action and they're not actually or they did something that can't be reversed or something like that?
Right, and I think that the organization as a whole, being a group that's meeting, this is not something that is, as I mentioned before, a freelance type situation. So you have to have participants that will support the outcomes that are developed by the groups, and so those groups are really self-monitoring each other. So you don't really have someone that goes off on this rogue decision-making process and says, okay, well, we're going to do this, and since I'm in power right now, this is what happens. It is a discussion that goes throughout the group and is responsibly decided. But there's support in numbers as well. So if something seems like it might be kind of chaotic and crazy, and how are we going to do this? There is a little bit of risk taking in that as a group talks to each other and buys into that, they realize that there may be the ability to fail here. But that's kind of the beauty of the action learning, is that we do something, we touch a hot stove and we realize that, oh, that's hot, and we don't touch that hot stove again, and we go to another method. But it's kind of I relate a lot of this to design thinking, in that you're failing, and you're failing fast, and you're learning what works and what doesn't work, but you're getting results. And so I think really the important part is that you communicate to everyone in the organization and the culture as a whole, and that's why the culture is really important to develop, is that, look, we're going to try some things and they may not work, and so let's try it, let's do it. If it doesn't work, everybody understands that we're going to be moving on to the next thing and trying something else. So that's my time.
Nice job, Brian. I like your connections to design thinking too, and the feeling fast, and that's how you learn. That was nice.
Thank you, Dana. All right, who do we have next? Mr. Marsh.
I'm up next with appreciative inquiry. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. Can we bring things in directly with the Google Drive for Hangouts?
I
Let me see.
like.
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
You're talking about like dragging it into the.
Well, there's a little over in the icons on the left. There's the Google Drive one. I don't know if I can display it though.
I don't know if it'll actually display the doc or the presentation.
I guess just the doc.
It looks like you
that?
could get presentations. I mean, I see the presentation thing.
Do you see mine at the moment?
I see.
Showing up?
Says you've added I'm sorry, this is Todd Hurst has added this and used the app. So.
Oh, I guess I have to give access. Anyway, let me do a screen share. That'll be easier.
Okay.
I tried.
Action learning.
Nice.
That's good. I'm just getting a black screen. Is anybody else getting a black screen right now, or is that just me?
No, it just came up.
Oh.
There it is.
How's that look?
It looks great, Tyler.
Okay. So some of you probably have, or all of you have familiarity with appreciative inquiry because we've talked about it in class last term and a little bit in our first meeting. So just want to get into kind of some background and what are the conditions involved with it. The kind of big name in appreciative inquiry is David Cooperrider, and he has a partner that he's worked with. They both developed this idea in the 80s, and it actually started as a research model and then moved into kind of this change model. And so appreciative inquiry really seeks to find what they call the positive core, which is just looking at what are the best in individuals, in groups, in organizations, and try to bring those out and apply those to systems thinking and apply those to change models to get those kind of moments when organizations were doing their best and try to replicate that in other areas or use what they learn from those process and the conditions involved in that and apply that elsewhere. Just in terms of conditions, so it's really customizable. It can be something that you do that's quick and informal. It can be something that's very formalized and long-term. It could be a large or small organization or even working within a community. One of the big things is it really requires a core team who's going to lead the process. It requires a lot of leadership support because it's really kind of like action learning where it's giving the leadership authority and decision-making authority to the organization as a whole. And so it requires this kind of core team to help guide that process, and especially for the first step of the process, which has these kind of structured interviews, that's going to help people to really kind of brainstorm what those positive core moments were for their organization. It uses what's called a 4D model, so there's 4 steps, all starting with D. The first is discovery, so this is that interviewing period where all participants are given a kind of structured interview questions that they're going to talk over with a partner in a small group to discover those times when the organization or even themselves as individuals were at their best. The second step is dream, and this is where those same participants are going to envision the future or some future goals, anticipating what a process could look like based on those interviews that they did in the discovery period. And then design is where they're really taking what they've seen in terms of where they want to be in that dream sequence and kind of the steps that they got to those best positive core areas in the discovery period, some strategies. So how can we take these moments where we were doing great things and apply them to those future moments, to the places where we want to be. And so then the following one is it's called delivery, and now they're starting to change this to call it destiny. I'm not really sure why the name changed, but this is where they're trying to, okay, what are the actions that we need to take, and kind of setting up the process and the plans for actually making these kind of dream designs a reality. And then, of course, as part of that, monitoring the progress. And this is a cyclical process as well. So going back to those moments where even as we're going through the process of designing new ways of doing things, okay, what were the best parts of those, and going through the cycle again. Some of the intended outcomes, it's really useful for creating a shared vision among organizations and groups. It's very reflective and collaborative. Of course, the whole essence of it is looking at the positive, so it's a very positive, optimistic, and open, and studies that they've done where they've looked at groups and organizations that apply this, people are very engaged and active because it's something that they enjoy doing, because it's looking at those things that have worked really well and finding ways to replicate that and to find not even solutions for problems, but find the best way of doing things. That's one thing that it is very clear. It's not about finding answers to problems. It's really just finding what are the things that we've done really well, and let's try to do that again. In terms of educational settings, similar to what Ryan talked about, but I think in any kind of change model, you have, I'm skipping, I guess, to the third one here, that people are busy, especially educational settings. You have teachers, you have administrators, you have for this, as well as working with students or working with the community, working with parents. That people are busy, they're disjointed, they're working on different things. So getting people together to come up with these ideas of these positive moments is difficult. It's hard to make it so it's not contrived, that it's something, okay, get together and talk and share these stories, and difficult to sustain. But one of the good things about it is, because of the positive nature, people tend to want to be involved in it, because it's motivational, it is something that's encouraging. So that's kind of one of the benefits of that sustainability area. There's been criticisms looking at the first two bullet points here, that if you're only looking at the positive, you're really invalidating negative experiences, which are also very important. So people might not be as willing to be involved in the conversation because they have negative thoughts, which are valid and important for the conversation. And this second one, there was a particular paper that we looked at where talking about having polarity of experiences, where it's only looking at the positive, or of course only looking at the negative, if it's only looking at one side of that instead of looking at the whole picture, it's not going to bring the kind of transformational change that you want in an organization. So that's a drawback of only looking at kind of one side of the coin. But we did look at a study. I'd be happy to share with all of you about the study, which was a case study that looked at the impact of one district looking at appreciative inquiry and applying it, and they had some positive results. Of course, bringing up these criticisms as well. But I'll pass that out in the Google Drive if you want to have a look at that. And I think that's it. Any questions?
So, Tyler, you were talking about how it applied what they did well and try to make, try to make it better. Curious as to if you're talking about maybe taking something that they do well and applying it to a situation where they're not doing so well, or would that be not the case because you're trying not to focus on the negative?
Um, I think in general, it's not so. The practitioners in it are very careful to say it's not something where you say, okay, here's a problem, let's apply appreciative inquiry towards it. They're hoping more to it's kind of out of this constructionalist theoretical mindset where let's look at the positive things and let that develop into new ideas and new areas of exploration.
Okay, so they're really more focused on, you know, making some things better, focusing on their successes, but it's interesting how they don't really address problems, or do they just think they're going to go away, or do they think the good things are going to outshine the bad things, or just curious.
Yeah, sure. I think you hit on one of the big criticisms of it because it's not really a problem-solving technique. It doesn't look at where the areas of deficiencies and try to find solutions for that.
Got it.
I guess if you applied it perfectly, that probably those would be organically addressed through the appreciative inquiry process. But it's definitely one of the big criticisms. It's like, let's not look at those. Let's not focus on those negative things, and let's just look at what are we doing to be positive.
Well, and furthermore, it assumes that any given event that's done well or a process done well doesn't have some negative aspect to it as well. I mean, that anything that you do, there are going to be pluses and minuses too. So are you just ignoring the negatives to the overall positive piece, if that makes sense?
Sure.
Right, Todd.
Interesting.
And I might be, because we're getting a very limited exposure to these theories, I might be, oversimplifying it. I know the people who are looking at this are readily willing to admit the deficiencies there, but I might be oversimplifying it.
And Todd's right. You can always find a problem. You don't have to look very far to make a list of those. So sometimes you could get bogged down in focusing in on all the places where you're deficient, as opposed to building on your successes and maybe trying to focus on one thing that you're not doing well or something like that. So.
Yeah, I think you've probably all experienced moments where you go to something that's professional development or coming up with solutions, and it just becomes kind of gripe sessions. So I guess it's a counter to that, but I think those are valuable insights as well.
I think it's also interesting. You mentioned time as well. Here at our high school this year, as a master schedule, I experimented with common planning blocks and was able to, at the sacrifice of some scheduling, basically implement 29 common planning sessions, so 29 different subject areas where have one block where they're both off at the same time, or they're all off at the same time, and they can meet. In a high school, that's very difficult to accomplish. And at a teacher leadership forum where they have all the teachers of the year, they basically request, their biggest request was that they needed time to plan together. Yet the kickback here at my school is that they really don't like to have their time encumbered with this common planning block, and I'm like, this is very interesting. I don't know. You have the teachers of the year saying at this big forum to the superintendent, we need common planning time, and then you have, so kind of highlights that little problem there, building on the positives, or finding a problem with why it is that we're doing something, and how something can be positive or negative depending on how you turn it around. So.
I have found that a lot this year, because this year at my current job, I have one common planning period with one of the people that I teach with, and I have so little planning time. Like, it's caught up. It's a small school, so I'm doing recess duty and lunch duty and all those things. But I'm really guarded of my free time now. But then in my last school, I had 1 to 2 blocks a day of free planning time, but what was amazing is they were constantly filled up with meetings.
Yes.
So, and now I wonder, like, because my time is so limited, like, we have a 20-minute team level meeting to talk about, like, the entire 7th grade, or talk about the entire 8th grade. Before, it was an hour and a half. So do we
Yeah.
just fill that stuff with other stuff? You
Right.
know, it drives me a little crazy.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a
sorry,
struggle. No, go ahead. You're good.
one thing about where I work right now, the administration has done an incredible job, like giving teachers free time to do what they need to do. Like he doesn't like say, oh, you got 2 hours today. Here, I'm going to give you something to do. He's like, I know you're professionals, so I'm going to let you guys go and do what I know you need to do for your classes or whatever. That's one of the things I really appreciate about where I work right now is it's just like he understands that you know what what you need to do. Now, some people take advantage of that, of course, but there are people who are just like, thanks for the 2 hours that I really need, just open to really take that time and inquire about what's going on, in my classroom and work on, reflection and all of that. So it's cool.
I think we're done.
All right.
Todd
All
in the
right,
car.
yeah, so we'll try to do this, and I just realized that my daughter unplugged the headphones, so you may get My Little Pony running in the background too.
Always welcomed. Always welcomed.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll try this. I'm on 3 bars right now, so hopefully everything goes smoothly. I did try the Drive app, but I don't know how all that works. So let me see. Are you guys seeing anything right now?
You see your picture right now, but it is a nice picture. You have really nice
One
eyes.
of us
I'm
should
just
just
saying.
share a screen and be your person.
Here, I can do it. I'll just screen share this. I have it up, so hopefully.
Oh, look
yeah,
at that.
Oh, nice.
Looks great.
Showing off in a car. Look at that.
Yeah, so, okay. So I'm ready. If Dana, you want to start?
Yep.
Okay. Which is, as the name kind of suggests, looking more towards the future. It is a systemic approach like the 2 previous ones. What I find interesting is both of the ones before were more iterative and ongoing, I feel like, and this is more of a point-in-time event, which kind of sets it apart. So we'll kind of jump right in. So like others, there are people associated with this theory or this change strategy. It is Weisbord and Janoff are the ones that are typically cited. And in fact, they've both written books and developed actually a future search network that people can buy into and become trained facilitators. There's a whole process associated with this, which is kind of interesting. It also kind of limits how much information is out there because it's got a cost structure to it. So they're not going to share a ton for free, but I think enough for us to kind of get a good overview. So the purpose is to have a democratic approach to real-time, large group change planning from a systems approach or systems perspective. And there are these 3 kind of core principles. One, represent the system in one room, meaning all the important components of the system need to be represented together at one time. Explore the whole in context before seeking to act on its parts. Focusing on common ground and desired futures, considering problems as information. So once again, a systems approach, thinking about how what you're discussing affects everybody rather than a of the organization. And then the final piece, self-manage work and take responsibility for action. That everybody has to kind of be their own leader within this kind of idea. It's interesting when they talk about the facilitators for the process. There's not a whole lot of training. There's training, I guess I should say. There's not a whole lot of direction that's given before going in, though, because you're not coming into the Future Search Conference with a particular perspective. You're not coming in with a particular end in mind. You're letting that emerge as you have the conversation. So it's definitely upon the participants to take their own responsibility to seeing the end come to. So an overview of activities. This is typically, like I said, systems approach. So typically 30 to 80 people getting together for a conference that lasts 2 to 3 days. It has, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, 5 main components within those 2 to 3 days. One being looking at the past, looking at the present, looking at the future. Sorry, there's a lot going on. Looking at the future, developing consensus, and then future planning. So day one, focus on the past, highlight milestones, and then focus on the present external trends. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Day two is focus on the present, responses to trends, owning actions, and then you start looking towards the future ideal scenarios, and then discover common ground. And finally, action planning on day three, really kind of thinking through what are we going to take out of this event and actually change within the organization. So a few conditions for success. One is there has to be the development of a steering committee that thinks through what they're trying to accomplish, make sure the right people are in the room, make sure that the event's conducive to learning. Second condition for success is eliminate assumptions about possible solutions before the event. So you're coming in with the idea that you're going to go through the process and develop the solutions. You're not going to create a bunch of assumptions beforehand on what should be done. Third, ensure that a wide variety of stakeholders is represented. Most importantly, you want to make sure that all people at the event are interdependent upon one another so that one person can't say, well, I don't care whether or not this affects you, because if they're all interdependent, then everybody's going to be bought into the process. And finally, guarantee adequate time. Most important is that you're not rushing this process, that you're allowing ideas to formulate, simmer, and then come to fruition. So intended outcomes, establishment of a collective solution, and empowerment to enact on it. That's, of course, a key part, but we need to make sure that all the people at the table doing this process have the power to go back and change some things. And then also formulation of a common ground for all the participants that creates a mutually supportive culture for organizational change. So making sure that everybody has a common place where they're starting from. Critique. One, it's not something that can solve all of an organization's problems. This is going to be very focused on one particular area, and it's very time intensive for that one particular area. An area of focus must be selected before the event, so there's some bias that goes into that and where you're looking. But it's also difficult to select that area and then not have an intended outcome associated with what you want to do in that area. So it's kind of a convoluted process. A healthy climate should already be in place. You need to make sure that everybody can work together effectively and discuss issues. If there are issues in place, then there won't be the environment to actually solve the problem. Two, is very time intensive, as I said, 2 to 3 days, full day events. So finding time when teachers could actually get out and do that would be nearly impossible, I think. So I don't know exactly how they do that unless it's during a summer retreat or something to that effect. Participants must be from various stakeholder groups, so you have to have a wide participation group. And then finally, you have to have the buy-in from the organizational leaders that the participants are empowered to enact their solution. So that is a very brief overview. Unfortunately, there was a lot going on in the background, so I apologize about that. We apparently stopped at a McDonald's, and my daughter's wanting stuff, and things are going nuts here, so sorry about that. But I think that is it. Any questions?
I was just going to point out, I think it's one of the things that spoke to me was the area of focusing on the past and the history of what the organization has done. I think a lot of times, especially in education, we hear the cliche of, well, we're just renaming this strategy and we're calling it something different and we're hoping that it works now because, when I was teaching 12 years ago, we did this and it was called this, and now we're doing this again and it's called this. And so that's just an interesting thing that I don't know that education really does. We're always looking to for the next best thing that's going to help our kids, and we very rarely go back to some of the basic things and look at those, and are not afraid to rename some things. We love to recycle and call it something new to see if we can rejuvenate it. So I think that's, but it is a key to know where you've been, and what you've already tried, and because people do remember that, even if you're trying to make it something different, then people remember what they used to do, and they're not as quick to buy into it if you're just trying to put a new label on it. So
Yeah, no, totally agree, and I do think that's important too, because that was one of the things as we were looking at it. In order to know where you're going, having this focus on the future, it's important to kind of look at your successes and failures in the past and have a comprehensive vision of how this is going to impact your organization. So, absolutely, I think that's one of the things that separates it from, some of the other initiatives that we've looked at is that it does kind of take that more comprehensive view of where everything is. Once again, I kind of worry that it's a point-in-time event, though. And once you go back, it's whether or not you're actually able to implement what you've talked about.
good job, Todd.
I like the fact too, just to not to harbor on it, but when you focus on, like, when you spend some time acknowledging the past, like, you're really acknowledging the knowledge of the room. And so often we forget that people have been through various different types of trainings. They come to us with a variety of knowledge and experience. And I think that it's important to make them feel heard and valued before then you ask them to contribute. And so I like that piece.
Awesome.
That's good.
Yeah, and once again, I apologize. I mean, the car was completely silent until I started talking, and we're following my in-laws, and they decided to stop at McDonald's. All hell broke loose.
Don't worry about it.
So we pulled into McDonald's, and my wife was freaking out, and so
It's excellent.
I apologize.
It was really, really good.
It was.
I was probably rambling too, because I'm trying to maintain what's going on in the car and the. I'm sweating quite profusely right now, so I apologize.
I thought you were really professional. I thought you did a great job.
I might have muted the mic and then said it still would have shown up on audio somehow. So.
I probably would have turned around and been like, "Shut up!"
Daddy's trying to present right now. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
See me whack again.
A little entertainment for Dr. Farina.
Yeah, I apologize. All right.
That's great. Really good.
Thank you.
Totally fine.
Really good. All right. So I guess this is the last one on the premortem technique, and then we'll kind of open it up to some reflection at the end if you want to do that. I know we've got exactly 15 minutes before we're supposed to be done, so maybe 14 minutes. So I'm going to open this up here. Let's see. Okay. So is that showing up everybody right?
Yes.
And I'm going to put a presenter view here. Is that full screen now?
Yep.
Oh, I went to the end. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so this is called the premortem technique. I thought it fitting considering it's kind of we're coming into the Halloween season. It's a really, really cool idea that kind of deals with things relating to death and failure. So it's kind of a really appropriate technique for the time. I worked on this with Jill Janes and Todd Norton. Kind of a synopsis, a quick overview. Premortem seeks to diagnose potential sources of failure prior to them occurring. So it's kind of like when you think about things that are hazardous to your health, you try and avoid those situations, or you think about things that can lead to, in terms of an analogy of the human body, you think about things that are going to hurt you or things that are going to lead you to have health problems. And you try and avoid those things, or you think, I know that this is going to happen if I do it, so how can I go ahead and plan for that? And I know that this is going to lead to failure, so why don't I try and account for those variables? And this just takes and applies this to organizations and how you can try prepare for coming situations and possible failures that might take place. So conditions for success of the premortem technique is that you want to set it up for where there's a specific timeline. So it's not a long process. It's not cyclical. It's not something that you do and then you go back and you try again. It takes about 1 to 2 hours or 5 minutes per participant for the process to take hold and to discuss. Small groups work best, but it can be used for larger groups if you want to. It really just depends on the situation that you're trying to and the organization you're applying it to. You definitely want to make sure and prepare for a time that you are thinking about when you're implementing a certain process or you're trying to do something in the organization and you want to account for that. So if you're thinking about something that's going to be rolling out, especially in terms of education, if you're talking about new testing standards or if you're talking about new assessment for teachers or new student feedback processes, how can you discuss the time period and how long it's going to take to account for the possible failures that might take place during that time. So activities, how facilitators can use this. What facilitators do is they ask group members, what are some possible failures that can go along with what we're about to implement? What are some areas for critique that we can look at and say that this might cause this thing to not work? And I think in terms of education, that's something that's not asked a lot. We tend to ask the question, okay, how are we going to measure the successes, assuming that everything's going to work out just fine, and then assuming that we're just going to measure the level of success based upon this. We're not even going to consider how this process might fail and assume that it's going to fail and the variables that might account for that failure. So facilitators start off and pose just a question or a few questions to the group and allow for a few minutes for group members to jot down any ideas or notions of failure that might go along with the proposed idea or the proposed process for the organization. All the members share out with each other and for the group about what these possible failures might be and the variables for them, and they talk about their reasoning as behind why they mentioned that failure. Facilitators can keep a chart of the results. They can take notes to try and have a later discussion about things that they can use to counteract those possible variables for failure. And the big question is what we do to avoid these reasons for failure. And then facilitators lead a group in generating action planning steps to guide the project development. So how can we, knowing that these are the possible failures that can come up, and here are the variables that could account for those failures and reasons as to why this process or procedure or product that we're trying to put out could fail, what do we need to do now to make sure that doesn't happen? And how can we reduce those variables that might lead to failure of what we're trying to do? So the intended outcomes, the premortem technique is an event designed for small groups and the group collectively to share past experiences. I know we talked about that in the previous presentation about how it's important to share out about what people have experienced and their different professional development experience and their different experiences in the classroom and different organizations to try and prepare for what might happen as a result of what's happened in the past and address the potential elephants in the room to talk about, okay, look, no one's talking about how this is going to really have an issue here. We're trying to ignore these big factors that are really going to lead to the failure of this proposed this change that we're wanting to put forward, and we need to address that because it's really going to have an effect on what we're trying to do for the organization. Members are encouraged to tap into what they know and intuitively what they expect is going to happen. I mean, just don't act like, well, everybody knows that, so I'm not even going to mention it. Bring up things that you might think is general knowledge because it might seem general to you, but it may not be general to the entire organization. Some small thing might lead to the failure of this proposed change method that you're trying to put forward in the organization, and if you don't discuss that, then it may never come forward and it may not ever be accounted for. By collaborating together, you have the tactical advantage of discussing all the different proposed failure ideas from every sort of background and everyone that has different experiences. So especially in education, you've got people that are teaching from different grade levels, different content areas, and so having this discussion about possible failures for the entire organization is great because you've got mindsets from every angle. So members are also allowed to freely voice their concerns without fear of scrutiny or fear of repercussions about saying that something might affect students this way or might affect administration this way. So that way there's a sense of freedom to share your ideas. Premortem strategies also allow organizational members to take action steps to avoid failure using prospective hindsight and address project concerns that need the most attention as quickly as possible. So definitely when we were talking about that timeline earlier, you want to take into account how much time you've got before this proposed organizational change is going to take place, and you want to try and account for those variables as quickly as possible. Especially in education, there are things that roll out very quickly as soon as they are presented, and you want to make sure that you account for how much time you have to account for variables that might lead to failure. So critique of premortem use in educational organizations. You know, there's not a ton of instances where educational organizations are using this technique. Most of the time, when you think about change methods and organizational restructuring or anything like that, most states, state schools and districts and national policies are based upon data and results of things that already taken place and trying to put forward strategies based upon that data. However, there's no question of, okay, here's what the data is telling us, and here's how we're going to put forward this change method, and here's the possible failures, and assuming that this change method is not going to work, why is it not going to work? Questions amongst school district policymakers are, what are the goals of this proposed project, and how will we evaluate it, not what are the failures of this proposed project, and how can we account for those variables. By doing this, you're going to account for those districts that have difficult learning environments with students that are coming in from different backgrounds and trying to account for those and account for those failures of students in the classroom. You've got students from different demographics coming in. You've got students from definitely different environments that are coming into the classroom, and you want to try and account for those possible failures and struggles that teachers are going to have and administrators are going to have by not just acting like they're not an issue. By saying, look, these students are going to be put together into a classroom where there's going to be a difficult learning environment. How can we try and account for the possible failures and account for those variables that might lead to failures of students and struggles for teachers in the classroom, and how can we adjust for that? This idea of looking at failed education, putting forward a policy for education and then analyzing the corpse after it's over is no longer effective. It's not something that is leading to effective change. So what needs to happen is assume that something's going to die, and why it has died is a better question based upon this technique for educational change and for proposed organizational change efforts. So that's the premortem technique in a nutshell. I hope that the summary, kind of presented in a way that where it was understandable. Do you have any questions?
I think it's the last point you made is fairly interesting. Spending time evaluating what went wrong. I think really that points to a bigger issue in education, which is that I don't know that we always know really what's going on because the area is that we're looking at is so large. Just looking at the statistical stuff with quantitative and qualitative data, in our last few classes is kind of opened an eye to how hard it is to really understand what is going on in our schools. And like just take a literacy initiative. What data are we using to say that we have a literacy problem? And what data are we using to say that what we're doing is working to fix that literacy problem? There's just the types of measurements that we have out there are not always very efficient, and also it takes so long. I think that's what your last point was getting to is we don't have 2 or 3 years to figure out why a policy went wrong. We need to really be able to figure that out fairly quickly, and if we can't, then don't waste time on it. But I think the question is, what is really happening? And I don't know that we have either the people or we have the correct methods or the data that we need to really figure that out and make a real conclusion as to what's actually happening.
I think especially in districts, when you've got a lot of ideas about innovation and design. I know we talked about design thinking earlier, and a lot of educational organizations just want to try new things just because they want to try something differently, but they're not trying to account for the fact that you're putting something out there that it may fail, and let's assume that it will, and what are the variables that could lead to that failure, especially with new ideas and things that are kind of going against the grain of what's happened in education for a long time. And you see a lot of, you're seeing a lot of success in school districts that are implementing, new technology, baseline understanding levels to where students are, the ground level is technology. It's a basis for education. And there's that assumption that it's going to lead to higher levels of learning, but you're not thinking about, okay, what are the possible failures along with pedagogical techniques? Are teachers just going to now use technology as a crutch for their classroom? What could possibly be the ramifications, and what could be the variables that lead to failure of using technology in the classroom? And not just analyzing it after it's happened, but assume that it's not going to work and why it didn't work. And I think it's an interesting question that a lot of people don't think about. You don't ever assume that, I use the analogy of marriage. You don't ever assume, you're just going to get a divorce and then think about the, the factors that are going to lead to that, and try to account for them. It's just, you think, oh, we're married now, everything's good, we're going to be great for 68 years. I say 68 because my grandparents were married 68 years, but it's not just a number I came up with. But how can you account for those different things that you struggle with? And we don't think a lot about that in education. We just assume that these things are going to work because they're new and innovative, and we don't think, okay, what are the failures let's assume it's going to fail, and why did it actually fail, or why did we think it's going to fail? So there you go.
Josh, do you think there's some level of confirmation bias in that? If you ask everybody, why is this going to fail, that eventually it's going to fail?
Yeah. I think so. I think it can be tough. It's definitely one of those things that, like, I don't know. In terms of that, I don't know. It's sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, I can see that there are always going to be naysayers in every organization and in every building. I mean, I think you know people in your own building that you could say tomorrow we're going to everyone, and they would say, yeah, that's smart, and come up with like a million reasons why we shouldn't do it, So there's always going to be people that just want to do it the way it's been done now. I think that's a natural. Some people are just not. You do bring up a good point that you're going to have those people that are gun ho about the idea. Those people in that camp, and then you have the other ones that are like. So it's almost like you're approaching two different types of groups of people, two different opinions on that. And probably the people that want it to work are in the minority, and the people that don't want it to work are, so.
And another thing, I think this technique could quickly become into a gripe session. Like, oh, here's why this is gonna fail.
Right.
It's like you got to be careful with that kind of conversation because you want to make sure it's constructive.
Sure.
Where you're trying to put together something that, like, we're not trying to sit here and slam what what we're trying to do, but we're trying to account for the fact that we don't know everything from every angle. We don't know what could possibly happen. What are some ideas that we haven't thought about for when we put this out there that could possibly lead to its failure? I mean, what are things that could lead to it not working? And coming at it from that angle, I think, kind of changes the mindset from a gripe session to a constructive. We want to make sure this works and when it doesn't fail. So what could be the areas for failure? So
the ultimate problem in all of this in each of these situations is when you look at people who are coming to a table. And I know one of the I think it was Todd's program that was talking about coming to it without eliminating all your assumptions as to how we're going to solve this or whatever. But everybody comes to the table with their personal problems, the things that affect them on a day-to-day basis, and those are the things that they're going to fight for. I mean, that's politics, that's government, that's so being being able to get a culture where everyone comes to the table with an open mind, that even though the solution may totally rock their world and the way that they do business, that is really, I think, at the key, at the heart of how you make the change is being able to achieve that. If you can figure out how to get people to be open-minded enough to say, all right, I really thought I had this all figured out. I got a good system. I get up every morning. I do this. I do that. I go here. I go there, and then I go home, and it was a great day. And now you're asking me to rearrange all of that and change my whole life and turn everything upside down. And people will fight for that. I mean, I think you've seen that in your buildings. People will fight for their way of doing things, even if it is a better way. They need to be able to, I mean, you really have to convince them that that's a better way, and that's hard to do. I think that's really ultimately the challenge of leadership is getting that accomplishing that culture.
And isn't there always a better way? I mean,
Sure.
as soon as you have a new way, a better way comes around. Like, I mean, I'm just constantly amazed at how many times I've switched back and forth, and it depends on the school district, what school I'm working for, but like it all kind of works. But I don't know. Each time I think I've got it figured out, then something else comes along. I'm like, oh no, I gotta change everything again.
There's the opportunity cost as well. Like how much better is this going to be for me to change everything? Like what kind of an investment am I making to get just that much better? Like what is, and can we prove that it's that much better? And who's going to figure that out? And who's telling me that it's that much better? And I mean, I think if you can convince people that it's worth the change, then great. But like you said, Dana, I think there's sometimes where we're just changing just to change because we have a new person in the building now, or we have a new new book out, or someone's making some more money on a speaking series, and we're gonna buy all into that, and we're gonna spend the next 5 years shifting gears. And the problem is that in large organizations, as education really typically lives in, is how many groups of kids get caught up in that crossfire while we're changing what we're doing. And it's scary because you never know whether that change is going to be for the better or not. But at the end of the day, you hope that those 5 classes of kids that graduated under your watch while you were making all these crazy changes actually benefit and didn't get hurt in the process. It's a real time problem. That 5 years is a long time to try to implement something, and it takes a long time to implement some of these things.
And to implement it well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think Ryan, you're right on point. And what I was going to add as well, one of the things that's frustrating to me, and we've brought up design thinking a couple times, is all of these ideas are systems changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something in working with governmental organizations and schools across the state that I find being done way too frequently is they're looking at it from within their own systems and what currently exists. And I think that's one thing design thinking does really well, is it allows you to talk with the end user and reframe everything from the end user perspective rather than the structures that are currently in place. And I feel like all of these strategies, you can get bogged down into creating new ideas that fit within the current systems. And
Right.
Sometimes the systems need to be blown up. So a good example of this, working with some school districts recently, they were talking about pathways that currently exist and adding in dual credit associate degree pathways within those. And the course sequence that they had in place within their school created pathways for airplane repair. They had the courses in place for that. But it didn't make a whole lot of sense because there aren't that many jobs needed in that area, but that was the system that was already in place. In order to really create pathways that led to high-paying jobs, they would have had to create new courses, which would have taken much more work, and students were more interested in those areas, but it wasn't within their frame of reference. So I think all of these strategies have a tendency to still view things from within your box and not see things from perhaps different perspectives or what the end user actually needs.
It's a great point, Todd. I mean, I think we've tried to implement some things here this year with grading guidelines and redos and retakes and mastery and trying to make sure that kids are learning the material as opposed to just earning a grade for it. But everyone's kind of still not sure how to do that because they're been ingrained for so long with the way that we always do things. Well, how do I do that in this system? Well, you don't have to use it. You have to get rid of that thinking. You have to stop thinking about that system, and that bogs all of us down, I think. Definitely a good point there, Todd.
All right, well, thanks, guys. That was great. Good discussion and good presentation. Everything sounded great. Are there any other comments, or everybody's good? We good?
It's good.
I think we're good. Thank everybody for their input on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks
Cool.
everybody.
Awesome. All right,
It
guys.
was really great. I look forward to doing this in a couple minutes with all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for keeping our time, Dana.
There's just going to be 20 more little boxes on the bottom, like 15 more little boxes on the bottom, so it's okay. Not a problem. We all good.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Sounds good. All right, we'll see you in a minute.
See you on the other side.
Yeah.
Bye.